So Microsoft Developer Tools and non-production environments. Basically, my idea today is to give you the most important notes about that licensing, because licensing itself, it's quite complicated. Visual Studio department in Microsoft is almost like a state inside the state. They have their own rules. They have their own very specific licensing requirements, which I'll touch upon. Not everything is in the slides, so I suggest when you will, even when you will receive the slides themselves, I will be saying a lot from myself, which is not on the slide. I couldn't put on the slides. Maybe they'll be like a last minute idea. I personally very like this topic, because I have helped many customers to avoid disasters linked to non-production environments, and I've been doing this particular thing. Even training Microsoft people on Microsoft licensing in non-prod environments since about 2012. I actually have a Russian language. It's in Russian, unfortunately. I'm sorry if you don't speak Russian. I have a 2014 version of my Visual Studio audit training on this channel, which may or may not at some point be translated to English and updated. It's a much longer training. Actually, live, it took from 8 to 16 hours. It's absolutely crazy. So may happen, may not happen. I can't promise. But what I will give you today is the key points, which if you learn and understand, it'll be very easy then to gather additional data and little details from Microsoft product terms. By the way, speaking of which, so a quick disclaimer, I just need to flash it on the screen, because we're not Microsoft. Just to remind you, we're not Microsoft. This is our training. We talk about our own experience. We talk here about our own battle scars from previous client engagements. And as I said, we work with 20, 30 countries already, and it's mind-boggling, really, sometimes the difference between different countries. Always check everything I say here with product terms. And in addition to this, by the way, there's also a Visual Studio website, a Visual Studio marketplace. And what I noticed today, and we, just before this training, just 30 minutes before this training, I was on a Skype call with a distri, CSP distri, and we couldn't understand certain things that are written on the Microsoft website that he, for example, doesn't see in his price lists. So lots of things are changing around CSP. Even what we learn in this training may change in a few weeks. For example, if you watch part 3 of the Azure training, I was talking about that you can have reservations assigned to subscription, but you have to assign Azure hybrid benefit to individual virtual machines. You may not assign them to subscriptions. That has just changed a few days ago, somewhere around a week ago. Microsoft now for SQL Server allows you to assign Azure hybrid benefits to a subscription. This is crazily useful. This is immensely useful. So those things change. So therefore, always check whatever you learn from me, whatever you learn from this training, any other source, go to the Microsoft websites, go to product terms, go to Visual Studio Marketplace and Visual Studio website, dedicated website, and verify. Follow people like, us, obviously, our competitors who also talk about Microsoft licensing. Trainers, there are trainers on LinkedIn who post about Microsoft licensing. So please do that. So verify what we say here. Always refer to product terms, as I said. And the first thing I'd like to start from is a surprisingly common misconception that development does not need licenses. If I counted the number of times I've heard this from IT people, why do we need licenses for non-prod? It's free. I don't have enough fingers and toes on my body to count the instances. So, no, it's not free. Yes, it requires licenses. And the most important part is, don't box yourself into thinking like it's just development licensing. No, you can choose. Development licensing that we will be talking about today is an option. I have a client, I have had this client for many, many years, where if they bought Msdn licenses, Visual Studio licenses for all their users that require those licenses, that would have been more expensive than them using production licenses for their very tiny development environment. And that's what they've been doing. They wanted to buy Msdn. I said, don't do that, because we did a comparison. Always compare commercially. Maybe it's cheaper to buy production licenses. I'm serious. And why? Why? And why you may not understand that will be one of the slides in this presentation. Not even one, 3. So let's start with what is non-production. So there is no definition of a non-production in the Microsoft product terms. And Microsoft product terms is the Bible of Microsoft licensing. But nevertheless, so what are the non-prod purposes? There are 4 defined non-production purposes: development, design, demonstration, and test. And they're almost all the same across all the development products, except for SQL Server Developer, because SQL Server Developer also allows you, you know what? Forget that. Just cross this off. They're all the same, because that was an old rule. It's now non-relevant in 2021. So all the same rules, all the same for all the development products. So going back to my initial question, so what is a non-prod environment then? What is a non-production environment? So we realize now that non-production is development, demonstration, design, and test. What is a non-production environment? No such definition. All we can see in product terms is developer tools are not licensed to be used for use in the production environment. There's a typo on this slide. So how do we know that an environment is non-production? We must rule out that it is production, because production environment is defined. And production environment is defined. Some people find it very difficult. It's actually not. It's actually very simple. It's a bit vague, but everybody understands it. And I rarely see conflicts between clients and auditors and us in the interpretation of what is a production workload. Something that is your line of business application. Something that is used not just by your developers. It's just normal business application. We understand what production workload is. There's another caveat here, which is important. The second caveat, accessing production data. Accessing production data. So if the data is used in production, and even if you have a test application, I have the next slide talks about that, but just quickly, just to walk you through this, that is not considered non-production. If you work with production data, with production database, all of those applications that work with production database, no matter where they are in your development process, are considered production. There's another thing, when we're going to be talking in a few, I would say 20 minutes from now, when we're going to be talking about on-premises use of non-production, there's an interesting caveat in the virtualized world. If you have if in a cluster you have at least one production virtual machine that is either used for production or is accessing production data, then the whole cluster, but not the whole cluster. Sorry, not the whole cluster. That's important to understand. The hardware layer, the physical operating systems of the hosts also become production. It doesn't change the status of the other virtual machine. Again, there'll be slides about that. So let me read it. Let me now read it. So production environment is any physical or virtual operating system environment, physical machine or virtual machine, that is either running a production workload, itself just a production, or accessing production data. Again, I'll explain this caveat now. Or physical operating system, host in cluster, that is hosting one or more production virtual machines. That's the definition. Simple as that. I think it was brought in about 2019, because before that there was a misunderstanding about how production virtual machines affect physical clusters. And then after an internal infighting in Microsoft, there's an interesting story. I have a video about it on the channel where I talk about it in more detail. The licensing group actually updated product terms and they clarified what is the production environment. If you have any questions about this, let me know in the chat, because I will take those questions and I will answer them. So going back to accessing production data. So imagine you have a production application running and dealing with the data. If you're developing a new version, and in development, maybe you don't need to access production data. But what we see often, and not us, every auditor knows, if they hear from the client, from you, if they hear, oh, it's a staging environment, that'll probably be treat it as production straight away, because in the majority of cases, what staging means is you are either already connected to a production database, or the data that you have in staging will then be somehow migrated to production. That is also considered by the auditors and by Microsoft as production use. So you may not, in this case, like on this diagram, use Msdn Visual Studio licenses, Visual Studio subscriptions, DevTest licenses that are included in those subscriptions. You will have to license your staging environment in such scenario as a production workload, because it's accessing the production data. So this is not a non-prod. That's very important, and this has caught quite a few clients as well. I think we have a common wisdom from Pradeep here. If something is not paid, doesn't mean you're free to do whatever. Rights must be provisioned in some manner. Yes, and I have 2 slides about it. Thank you for this piece of wisdom today. So, how licensing is different with production and non-production. So production, we all understand production. We had 7 previous parts. Well, the 7th was about negotiations. We had 6 previous parts of the training talking about production licensing. That's just your normal everyday licensing, various metrics. Microsoft has added new metrics, which we'll be talking about on our combined event with redress compliance on the 16th. Yes, on the 16th, next week. So non-production is what's also called development licensing, and it's always per user. There are exceptions, but the majority do not think about exceptions now. It's always per user. You buy certain subscriptions or perpetual licenses, which are licensed per designated named user, because you're expected to assign subscriptions to users. And in some cases, not always, but in some cases, an audit may actually check if your actual users correspond to what you assign in your VLSC or whatever other tool you use to manage your licenses. That's important. They must be assigned to named users. But then those named users, which is also unique for development licenses, may use unlimited copies of software. You have 1 copy of Visual Studio, but because you're a licensed user, you may deploy 100 of copies. That is why if I see an ALP from a junior consultant who's only been in this industry for a while, or from some senior consultant who haven't learned yet, if I see an ALP comparing 100 discovered instances of Visual Studios with 5 licenses and saying the customer is short by 95 licenses, I have a very serious talk with these people, because you may not compare instances of Visual Studio to the licenses. You have to compare users of those instances. You have to establish who is using those instances. I understand that it's complicated, but that's not a rare situation when a company may have multiple instances thrown everywhere on various servers, and there are only 5 developers that are using those instances, and they have enough licenses for those instances. Because again, you're not licensing instances, you're licensing users, and I really want you to understand this. If you see an effective licensing position, so for example, imagine you're a client and you don't really learn all these intricacies. If somebody comes to you with an audit or a SAM review or a SAM compliance review, or you do an internal audit, and somebody gives you an effective licensing position in which you see a column installed software and you see a column licenses, and they compare installed instances of Visual Studio with user licenses, fire them. Seriously. Yeah, I'm a bit passionate about it. Cheryl, very good question. Very good question. And I will answer it later, but I will answer it as well here. What if you copy production data into a UAT environment for testing? That is permitted. Copying production data into a testing environment without bringing it back, that's important. Data may travel from prod to non-prod. It may not travel from non-prod to prod. Does it make sense? So what you're asking about is fine, unless you bring it then back after testing. You can't. You may update the schema, you may somehow amend the data manually, but you may not take that database and bring it back. That's not allowed. Pradeep, you asking this question. It's not. It's a kind of gray area when you do that. Please, could you please elaborate? Because I'll be happy to take that. Right. Moving on. I think we can do this training session pretty quickly, and I can take any of your questions today. I mean, we can even have an ask me anything session in the end. I'm happy to do that. So, what software is licensed through this way, through development licensing? So, some of the Visual Studio and Msdn platform licenses, well, the Msdn platforms by design does that, include my other Microsoft software. So if you, as a general line of thought, with the exception of CSP, of which we'll talk later, if you buy in Visual Studio through, say, an enterprise agreement or MPSA, if you buy subscriptions, you will also get rights to deploy unlimited copies of other Microsoft software, say Windows Server, SQL Server, Dynamics, SharePoint, Office, Visio, and all that jazz, almost all the Microsoft stack, depending on the level of your subscription, in an unlimited number of copies for the same purposes. So you may deploy so-called test environments, development environments under Visual Studio subscriptions or Msdn platforms. Basically, so to explain to you what Msdn platforms is, it's exactly the set of those dev test products without Visual Studio. Another explanation, which I often use when I talk to the customers, Msdn platforms is like Visual Studio Enterprise without Visual Studio. So you don't have Visual Studio, but you have all the other Microsoft products. Again, license per use. So the what products you get depends on the edition, and I have a slide in the end of this presentation that shows you what editions include what subscriptions include what, and if you want more detailed information, go to the Visual Studio website. I think it's visualstudio.microsoft.com. They have a downloadable PDF that outlines exactly what software comes with what subscription and what subscriptions do not include anything. That's also important. And CSP has really muddied the water there. So, moving on. Let's go not into licensing details, but, and by the way, just to show you, like Visual Studio standalone subscription doesn't have any other Microsoft software. That's why it's standalone. So let's go into pitfalls, difficulties, and misconceptions first before we jump into licensing, because I'd like you to understand the management level, the thinking. I'd like you to streamline your thinking about development. There's a very good test that was presented by Microsoft people. I have the names in one of the later slides. In 2014 at the WPC, it's sort of like a test that we use as well. Is that production? Is that server production? The test works like this. Can you take this environment and any data that it is consuming, which is important, any data that it is consuming, offline permanently, just delete it, right now, kill it, without impacting end users? And the majority of companies, that's how it works. So if the answer is yes, it will impact our quarters. We will not be able to update our software, but our business will not stop. Our line of business applications will continue to work. Then it's fine. Then it's non-production because it's not used in production in business activities. But if you cannot, if somebody says, "Oh no, we can't touch that," no, then it's not non-prod. Then it must be licensed as production. It's a very simple test. Can we delete it? No, sorry. The only exception from this rule is the companies that are software development houses, because they will have like 95% of their network as development environments. And also, well, if you delete that, well, the business will stop. But there are very few, and they're treated separately. And then in their case, what I say is, except for your developers and testers and your kind of your development business, let's talk about your accounting department, procurement, management, if we switch this environment, will they suffer? If they will, then it's production. If it only affects your development business, then it's non-production. Then it's not production. Hope it makes sense. Very good test. I mean, probably because you start talking about what's non-pro. This. Use this. In that regard, one of the things that have been often overlooked is that Azure DevOps server, which used to be called Team Foundation server, is a production workload. It's not obvious. It's not obvious, and I'd like it just to remember that. So if you don't trust me, there's a Visual Studio licensing white paper that will confirm this. So on-premises, I'm not talking about Azure DevOps server in Azure. Azure or Azure. By the way, funny thing, just going on a tangent. If I say Azure, as we say in the United Kingdom, YouTube and Google don't understand it, so it's very bad for SEO. So I'll be trying to say Azure as in an American way. So when I say Azure or Azure, YouTube and Google understand it. They will show the proper Azure in the subtitles. So Azure DevOps server is a production workload. With every subscription, with every Visual Studio subscription, almost, with exceptions, but let's say, I'm actually right on this slide. With every Visual Studio subscription, you get an instance license for the Azure DevOps server, Azure. It's not a non-production workload. Don't ask me why, because Microsoft decided so. So if you have dedicated non-production environments, do not deploy Azure DevOps server in dedicated non-production environments, or you'll make them mixed production. Keep it separately. Keep your Azure development DevOps server in a separate environment, in a production cluster. Again, I'm not Microsoft. I can't explain why. It's just a fact. Next thing, as just Cheryl asked, do not move data to production. And this is a scenario that, well, I've seen it. That's why I'm talking about it, and not one time. So on the first stage, application is developed with its own copy of data. It's all fine. So it has its own, orange on the slide, copy of data. I'm sorry if you're colorblind. I use colors heavily. So by the way, if anybody is colorblind, then please complain to me probably directly. So we'll think about how to improve our accessibility of our presentations. And production application runs with its own data. Data is separate, fine. In this case, on this, and you look at that and think, fine, that's non-production. If they want to license it with Msdn, with Visual Studio, I can't stop them. It's perfectly legitimate. But then in that process, it appears that then that data, when the new version is deployed to production, that data is either brought to production or merged with the production data. In that case, if auditors learn about it, somehow, if you tell them, that development environment for that application will be treated as production. So never, ever move data to production. But then the question arises, I'm an ex-developer. Wait a second, I want to update schema. I want to update the data. I want to throw in certain things. That's fine, as long as you don't take just the database, or you don't merge the data automatically from non-prod to prod. If you update schemas, do all those updates on the production database without actually moving the actual data from non-prod to prod, that is fine. That's okay. Obviously, otherwise it wouldn't be working at all. And then the one-way copy from, again, repeating what I already said, one-way copy from production to development is absolutely okay. Is absolutely fine. Hope it makes sense. Jitendra, I would like you to elaborate on your question. Any restrictions for backup copy in terms of production and trial, probably not trial version license? I'm not sure I understand, so please elaborate. I will pick it up when you explain what you mean, please. And thank you for being a member, Jitendra, for a few months already. So Really appreciate that. And he is one of the most misunderstood, the saddest, the most damaging, impacting misconceptions. Who needs to be licensed? What we see in almost all the cases is Visual Studio is only bought, and Msdn platforms is only bought for developers and testers, just direct developers and testers, say 5 people. Then we research the non-production environment, and we find that there's 100 IT people and project managers and other people who are accessing the non-production environment, not for the purposes of user acceptance testing, that's an exception, for the purposes of deploying software, managing security, managing virtual machines with System Center virtual machine management, logging into Visual Studio environments to check how a project is going on. So-called non-coding testers. Like, why would we buy Visual Studio for them? They're not coding, right? Anybody, if you created that sandbox, with Microsoft software that is used for non-production purposes, and you decided we're going to license developers with Msdn, we're going to license the whole environment with Msdn, from that point in time, every user, every admin, IT security, backup operator, support, everybody who is anyhow even touching that environment, even like slightly like need a license. They need licenses. And I'm going to illustrate it to you now. And that is why, by the way, sometimes buying production licenses is cheaper, because when you consider the cost of a Msdn platform subscription for 1,000 people, probably it's cheaper to license 50 non-production services production. So always do that comparison. And auditors will question this. This is one of the common things. This is why we even have a dedicated part of the training, because that's an important thing. So look at this picture. So we have an environment in which we have SharePoint server, Exchange server, Exchange maybe not that up to date. Let's say Dynamics server. Okay, in this case, 2 SQL servers, Windows server, probably on each of these servers. So the 5th server is just pure operating system, and we have just 5 people that are somehow interacting with this environment, except for user acceptance testing. And we have 2 developers. We have a non-coding tester who only codes. They don't need Visual Studio. We have a technical project manager who needs access to this environment to see what the hell is going on, what they're doing there. And we have IT operations, one of many people. So let's say one person for the simplicity of this slide. And I'm crediting the original ideas to 2 people, Carlos Zimmerman and John Griffin. They did that presentation at the WPC 2014, which was very good. So, and here's how they are licensed. And you can immediately see, because I highlighted it with orange, where the initial problem lies. The technical PM and the IT operations person are not licensed anyhow. So they do require licenses. But there's a second problem here. So look at the editions. Developer number 1 is licensed with Visual Studio Enterprise. And developer number 2 and the non-coding tester are licensed with Visual Studio Professional subscriptions, obviously subscriptions, because otherwise they won't be able to use SharePoint and Exchange. Because there's SharePoint and Exchange in this environment, the professional subscription doesn't cut it, because it does not include rights to use, to deploy as non-prod these products. All it has, well, we'll get back to that. I have a slide for that. All it has is Windows Embedded, Windows Server, and SQL Server. That's it. So if there were no SharePoint and Exchange server instances in this environment, this would have been fine for these 2 people. The technical PM and the IT person will still have to be licensed. But in this particular situation, we have 4 people licensed improperly. How to fix this? This is how. Because so developer number 2 needs to be upgraded to Visual Studio Enterprise to use SharePoint and Exchange in that environment, to even touch it, to be honest, not just use. It's accessing this environment. This person is accessing this environment. This person needs a Visual Studio Enterprise license. Sorry, I need to cough. Not feeling well today, really. Sorry for that. And then for the other people, so firstly, non-coding tester. Upgrading the non-coding tester from professional to enterprise is a bit of a waste of money because MSDN platforms is cheaper than Visual Studio Enterprise. But he still needs to access all these products. So to him and to other two people here on this slide, we need to assign MSDN platforms. We need to assign MSDN platforms. That is how it works. Any questions? Any questions? Type them in the chat. As I promised, I'll pick them up. There's a notable exception, which I have pronounced already 3 or 4 times. Users accessing applications for user acceptance testing purposes do not require licenses, neither CALs for the products, nor MSDN or Visual Studio subscriptions. But this is limited just to your regular users, say, your accounting users, your management, your not those in the IT bubble, outside of it. It's very difficult to assess. It's very difficult to assess. But anyway, bear in mind, so anybody who's working with the environment, really working, supporting, deploying, fixing, updating, those require licenses. Those whom you invite just to say, John, or, Jitendra, Cheryl, could you please test that application if it works as it's expected by you to work? That is called user acceptance testing. Users accept that the application is working. That does not require any licenses. So you don't need to license the entire organization. You only need to license the IT people that work with those non-production environments. And you may even opt for isolating them just to a certain number of admins and users with policies, with security groups, with firewalls, with geographic locations to reduce the potential costs. One of the often asked questions and one of the often frequent mistakes I see is misunderstanding that Visual Studio Community is not free. Again, I'm repeating this. Visual Studio Community is not free. There are exceptions which allow you free use. Otherwise, it's limited. And if you are below, if your organization, which probably doesn't apply to large countries, especially India, well, I mean, somebody just said recently, we're a small company, we only have 11,000 users. Really? 11,000 users somewhere in Cyprus doesn't exist. So really depends. If you are an organization below 250 users, don't worry. If you are 250 and above 250, either computers or users, or if your annual turnover, you may be 16 people, trading crypto. If your annual revenue is above $1 million US, in that case, the cases when you may use Visual Studio Community are very, very limited. Open source, I'm reading from the slide, I don't remember that. Visual Studio extensions, device drivers for the Windows operating system, SQL Server development, and education purposes, which are either online or in-person training or education, or for performing academic research. So you can see that. You may not just use it to develop your website. You may not use it to develop any internal applications just for the IT use or whatnot. You have to, if you are above 250 PCs or users or $1 million per year of annual of revenue, you have to uninstall it, get rid of it. Get rid of it. Because then again, in my personal experience, hundreds of clients, I would say with Visual Studio Community, probably below 100 tens of clients. In all the cases when I saw Visual Studio Community, and I work with enterprises, 1,000 plus, in all the cases when I saw Visual Studio Community and we questioned how it's used, it wasn't used in a compliant manner. Therefore, almost every time in the reports that we give to our customers, in the conversations that we have with our clients, we say remove Visual Studio Community. Get rid of it. We don't know what the punishment could be for it because we've never seen a client who would go through an audit, especially after we prepare that client for an audit, that would have had that installed. So not free, importantly. But then we have another question: is Visual Studio Code free? It's a very popular shell. Yes, just like that. No caveats. Seriously, read the license. No caveats. It's absolutely free. I mean, it's not it's not like a free for all, do whatever you want license. You may not sell it. There are certain limitations, but for normal use, it's, don't worry. Just don't worry. Visual Studio Code, you have it in your network, keep it. Don't worry about it. Don't remove it. Don't run to your bosses saying, oh, we have non-compliant software. You're compliant. Don't worry about that. Is SQL Developer free? Yes, from 2014. From 2014. Purpose limitations apply. So you may only use it for, as I said before, design, development, test, and demonstration. That is it. These are the four purposes. And it's all. So although I have a dedicated video about this on this channel, I will repeat this again. If you use SQL Server in development, why don't you use SQL Server Developer Edition? Feature-wise, it is even more than SQL Enterprise. So you get all the features. It may be limited in the number of connections, but you don't need it in development. So you get more than, I don't really remember the technical piece, side of things, but it's binary. It's SQL Server Enterprise. The thing is, sometimes when you only say use Windows Server and SQL Server in your development, sometimes you may even do it almost for free, almost, because you still need to license Windows Server. But you may run those production VMs where you only need to really just use SQL. In your production clusters, which I expect those virtual machines are not heavy load virtual machines, and not buy any additional licenses to do your development. So, to be honest, I mean, using SQL Enterprise and SQL Standard in development is silly. My opinion. Change it, reinstall it, remove your SQL Enterprise from development and deploy SQL Server Developer. I think the only reasonable instance where I would say it's fine to use non-developer edition is when you are testing it for compatibility with a third-party software that requires you to use, say, SQL Server Enterprise. Well, then, yeah, well, as long as you have enough Msdn platforms and Visual Studio Enterprise subscriptions, by all means, deploy SQL Server Enterprise. Otherwise, SQL Server Developer is just the to-go license. Another big misconception, many of you may be Microsoft partners, easily, even at the low level. You all get Visual Studio subscriptions with Microsoft partner packs, especially if you have, say, software development competencies or something like that. The catch there is, although you may have lots of them included in your subscription because you have lots of regalia from Microsoft and they give you additional licenses, you may not use them for direct revenue generation. What it means is, okay, I think it was 2010, I was involved in an audit on the client side, which is a worldwide known, very famous name, a software development house. They had somehow through their Microsoft partner programs something around 100, not 1,000, 100 Visual Studio licenses through the Microsoft partner network. Microsoft came with an audit to them because they knew that, and it was good. I mean, they weren't penalized. They were just asked to buy enough licenses, but they were told, they were very surprised. Like, why? See, just a second, we are your partners. We're your gold partners. We have all these competencies. We get all these licenses for free through the competencies because we deserve it. We deserve it. Yeah, for your internal purposes. But you may not use them to develop software for your clients and support your clients. For example, deploy test environments to test your clients' configurations in the sandbox. No, you may not. You have to buy Visual Studio license internally for your own purposes, for your own development, for your own website. By all means, no external activities. Nigel, as far as I know, it does have integration services. As far as I know, I would like our community here to respond to this question. I haven't been a DBA for something like 6-7 years, so can't confirm. It must, because that's the whole purpose. The whole purpose of SQL Developer, because it's not Express. Don't mix it with Express. It's a full-fledged, fully featured SQL Server Enterprise with all the services, R language, master data. That's the purpose. That is the purpose. It's not a cut-down version. So, but if anybody contradicts this, by all means, please do. And I will. By the way, I will check it from after this live. That's a very good question. So I thank you for that. So I don't know if shall I give you a tip about Maxwell partner licenses, which so I haven't read the NFR terms for about 2 years. The last time I checked them, there was a caveat: when it's non-direct, then you may use your partner license. What it means is, if you develop software but you don't sell it yourself, if you say sell it through retail or through a channel, you don't support it, you don't sell it, you give it to your channel and they resell it and they support it, then you may. Check your not for sale terms. If you have any doubts, reach out to me. I'm very curious to research this again for you, because I just like this. I like cracking those puzzles and finding cracks in those licensing rules where you can actually save money. Really love it. So, another misconception: we have third-party developers. So you probably don't know. If you have, say, contractors or third-party developers that develop something for you, they may bring their own licenses. Not all of them, though. They may only bring Visual Studio. They may not bring Azure DevOps. They may not bring Azure DevOps Cows. And as far as I remember, they may not bring Msdn software. They may bring Visual Studio IDE. So you don't need to buy additional licenses for your contractors if they already have the licenses. But the caveat here is, check that. Ask them to show you that they have proof of license, because what may happen is, if you're in an audit, auditors will uncover those licenses, discover those instances, and they will ask who's working with them. You'll tell them what users are working with them. Our contractors, third party. And you don't have enough licenses. The next question will be, do they have licenses? And you may say yes. And then the next question will be, prove it. An audit is not a declaration exercise. An audit is an exercise where you have to prove that you're not violating the rules. So, non-production on-premises. On-premises. Let's talk about on-premises. So, why I brought it into a separate section is because we're going to be talking about non-production VMs. I have a video where I explain my line of thought about it. Now I'm just going to give you knowledge, and I just don't want to waste time on proving my point here, because, well, I've been through tens of battles like this. I always win. That's why. But if you want to hear my line of thought, I have a dedicated video on the channel that talks about it. So I'll just learn you how it's treated. Just to remind you that when we talk about production environments, when we talk about hosts, production, when we have a production virtual machine in a cluster, the physical OSEs of the hosts become production too. But it does not work backwards. So if you have one virtual machine in a cluster, that is production, and the rest are non-production. You need to license as production that virtual machine and all the host operating systems. It does not extend back to the other non-production virtual machines. So let me show you this on pictures. This is a mixed, again, I apologize to those who are colorblind, but I hope it makes sense anyway. Blue color here indicates non-production environments, which may be licensed as non-production per user, I remind you. In this case, this is a dedicated non-prod cluster, and you may easily just license every user with some sort of a subscription, developer tool subscription, and it's absolutely fine. You don't need any production licenses in this cluster. What happens if somehow, for example, good example here would be, you have an instance of Azure DevOps server in this cluster, which is, as I told you before, a production workload. Or you have any other monitoring machine, which is also a production workload. You dropped one machine in this cluster, and then what happens is Again, these two machines here on this particular diagram on this slide, these two orange machines require production licenses, and then the host as well require production licenses. If you run VMware, it really doesn't change anything. If you run the host on Hyper-V, then you need to license the operating systems that runs Hyper-V. Unless there are exceptions. There may be exceptions. Right. How about Visual Studio? I'll pick up this question. So sorry for the interruption. How about Visual Studio installation done by third party onto your workstations? Does the third party need a license? Yes, they need a license, of course. You may assign your own license to them. Why not? Or they may bring their own license. And there's a question from Jitendra here. Can we use Visual Studio license for commercial purpose under Bespark subscription? As far as I remember, no. I need to check. Let me not answer this question, please, because Bespark is I haven't seen it for 7 years, probably Bespark. Jitendra, let's do it this way. If you send me your terms of your Bespark subscription, because they're not in product terms, if you send me the terms, I'll check it for you. Okay. I hope you understand this. So the misconception here is quite often is that even if you drop one production VM, then all the VMs must be licensed as production. No. Just the VMs themselves, the production VMs themselves, and the operating systems of the hosts. It does not affect the non-prod VMs. But, okay, so here's a but. What I recommend to every customer, let me go back to that. What I recommend to every customer is do this. Move away all your production workloads. Why? To avoid even that discussion, because it may be painful. I have dealt with even Microsoft representatives having no clue about Microsoft licensing, and they could be very stubborn. So don't get yourself into that situation. Just dedicate. Well, I have a slide for that today. System Center is an interesting beast. So System Center, if you manage your VMs and your hosts in a non-production environment with System Center, it does not change the production status of the OECs themselves. It doesn't matter. They remain non-prod. But the System Center itself requires production licenses. So say if you have dedicated clusters and you manage everything with System Center, the number of System Center licenses for your server management licenses, will be higher than the number of Windows Server licenses that are required. So System Center in non-prod, please don't forget that, because sometimes people just think, oh, it's included in Msdn. No, it's not. If you manage that environment, often it's either some sort of like endpoint security, and another frequent use is System Center Virtual Machine Manager. You need production licenses for those particular hosts. Where even if all the workloads are non-prod, again, it doesn't change the status of the VMs themselves, fortunately. But System Center must always be licensed as production. There are no non-production licenses for System Center. There's a very, very, very tiny exception. If you are developing a solution that extends the functionality of System Center, so it's not your production instance of System Center, then you may use it. Never seen it, and just had an engagement with a large development house where 95% of the infrastructure is development. They were quite shocked to discover that they need to buy licenses for System Center. They thought they're free, they thought they're included, but they're not. System Center is always production. No production in the cloud, where Microsoft created an unfair advantage. So developer subscriptions in Azure. Some of the subscriptions include Azure credits. So when the Azure, I should say Azure, as I said. So some subscriptions that include Azure credits, firstly, those credits are individual per user, and you may not combine them in one subscription or anyhow else. So they are for that particular person's sandbox in Azure. Hope it makes sense. You may not combine them. They're personal credits. The other thing about Azure MSDN use is that software that comes, any dev test software that comes with subscriptions, say like SQL Server or anything like that, as long as you use it for the development, design, demonstration, and test purposes, and all the users that are accessing those Azure VMs are also licensed with an appropriate subscription, that's absolutely fine. It may be used anywhere in Azure, no limitations. But again, access is restricted to those licensed users. And UAT, by the way, seems simple. But when we come to AWS, Google Cloud, Alibaba, then it becomes really just, sorry, let me go back, really becomes a bit sad. Yeah, back at AWS. When hardware is dedicated to your own use, you may not bring your own licenses unless they are bought, and this applies to every license, unless they are bought before the 1st of October 2019. That's the rule. The actual interpretation of this rule right now, which we tell every customer, dedicated or shared in those three providers, just don't bring your own licenses, because it'll be very difficult to prove to Microsoft that you bought that license before the 1st of October 2019 and all that jazz. So you may only use, so let me say this. There is no MSDN in those environments. By all means, do that in Azure, but you can't do this in those three providers at all. As well as the SPLA providers. So with SPLA providers, it's all very clear. You just cannot bring your own license at all. And it's always been like that. Sorry, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Sorry. Yes, you can. You can bring your own license to dedicated hardware to SPLA provider, because they're not so-called outsourced. They don't fall under the outsourced large providers terms. But if it's shared, which is the majority of SPLA, or like private clouds, not private clouds, mini clouds, cloud providers, I don't know, service.com, LeaseWeb, whatever names may come to your mind that are not Amazon, not Google, not Alibaba. If so especially SPLA providers suffer from this. SPLA providers suffer from this when they misunderstand this. They might deploy a few machines and they will say to the auditor, oh, that's just development and test, assuming that the customer may use their own MSDN rights in a SPLA environment. No, they may not. No, they may not. Those machines will be treated as production and will be hit with a huge bill. So, and also Visual Studio doesn't have license mobility rights, so you may not bring your own license into a shared environment in any of the clouds. If you want to use Visual Studio in AWS, Google, Alibaba, or any other SPLA provider, you have to pay, even if you have existing license, you have to pay for a monthly subscription per user on that platform. And it's painfully expensive. Right. The Garage, thank you very much as well. Thank you for being with us. License management. So that was all the basic principles. License management, how to buy. So I wish I understood completely how to buy, because Microsoft changes rules and introduces new ways of buying. But the simple diagram is here. So those of you who have enterprise agreements and enterprise agreement subscriptions, nothing has changed for you. There's a new version 2022 that has been just released, I think a week ago. It didn't change anything. It's almost the same licensing rules. Maybe a few tweaks in regards to what software is included in the subscription. You may notice that CSP doesn't have almost anything. So the CSP price list only has Visual Studio Professional, which is not even a subscription. It's just a perpetual license that you can buy through CSP. That's the only position on the CSP price list. But if you go to the visualstudio.microsoft.com website, which unfortunately I don't have a screenshot here, but we can try and go there. So actually, let me do that. So I can demonstrate you what I'm talking about. I'm typing right now. or even marketplace visualstudio.com. That's the actual URL. Marketplace.visualstudio.com, isn't it? No, just a sec. Please bear with me. I'm searching Visual Studio. How to buy. So even if I don't find it, yeah, it's actually visualstudio.microsoft.com. Let me move my browser to that window. Now you should be able to see it. Right. So I need to research this. So please bear with me. I apologize for the sudden slowing of this. Editions downloads, editions, Visual Studio Enterprise. Come on, show me. It's not here. It's in how to buy. It used to be in how to buy. Visual Studio 2022. Yeah, I think I'm wasting your time right now. Editions. Wait a second. It was just there. As I said, they changed the website very quickly. Editions pricing. I think pricing. Is it in pricing? Yes. There you go. So if you go to either business or enterprise, you can see these subscriptions, which are not on the CSP price list. Can you see this, by the way? I'm wondering if you can see that. Should be able to see it. Yes, you do. So it says purchase from cloud solution provider. So my question is how? I don't know. I don't know the mechanism, but you're supposed to purchase it either from cloud solution provider or these standard subscriptions, which are annual 3-year subscriptions. You buy these subscriptions, the standard ones, either through an enterprise agreement or through an MPSA or through, actually, by the way, Open Value if you're a small company. You can buy them through Open Value, which is pretty much alive. So Open License is dead. Forget about it. Open Value is alive. That's how convoluted and complicated it is, but that's how you buy them. But a word of warning: monthly subscriptions in CSP are cut down. Those monthly subscriptions that I've just shown you, they are cut down. They have nothing included. Basically, if you really want like lots of Microsoft software included, plus production use of Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise, for that user who's licensed with Visual Studio for some reason. By the way, when you have a license like that, you don't need to buy them an additional subscription. Don't double license them. By the way, don't double license them with M365. And also production use of a copy of a Microsoft Office Professional Plus. So this is how it is currently with Visual Studio 2022. In many cases, you will be in real life situations, you will be managing legacy licenses, and there will still be people running Visual Studio 2008, Visual Studio 2012. Well, why shall we stop them? Maybe there are features that are not present in the current Visual Studio. Maybe they were more, I would say, more convenient for those people in those versions that they're in the current versions. They don't want to waste money on buying, upgrading. So with the legacy entitlement, there are a few things. So firstly, what I just showed you, what software is included. Those included products may have been different in the previous versions. Editions, for example, there was at one point there was Visual Studio Premium. At one point there was Visual Studio Ultimate. At one point there was a Visual Studio Professional for software development or something like that. So they kept changing. What sometimes baffles people who try to understand the chain of upgrades in the Microsoft license statement is that a client had 5 subscriptions for professional. In the next enterprise agreement, they had 5 subscriptions for enterprise, software assurance renewal. So not for licenses, renewals from professional to enterprise, not step-ups, renewals. And then in the next period, back to professional. So Visual Studio is the only product of Microsoft that allows, at the renewal, to change edition. No other product of Microsoft lets you do that. You may choose at the point when you renew your agreement or renew your software assurance on your licenses, or nowadays it's not software assurance, it's subscription. When you renew a subscription, you may choose a different edition. So when you see that, don't be baffled. It's a perfectly legitimate way of renewing Visual Studio. The other thing is, for example, previous versions may have had Project and Visio as production licenses included with the subscription. As far as I remember, something, say, I'm making this up right now. I don't remember the exact year, but say Visual Studio 2010 Enterprise, probably very, very, very big probability included those products for production use, and then Microsoft removed it. I remember that point. When, I don't remember. When, I can't tell you. So always check Product Terms Archive. If you're using an old license on an old instance, always check Product Terms Archive, because the terms that apply to old licenses may have been different. Easily, like very easy. Another thing about legacy entitlements. So what we call now Visual Studio subscriptions, they've always been subscriptions, but they had a different name in previous versions. They were called with Msdn, which is the same as nowadays as a subscription. It's exactly the same thing. You just get additional software bundled with Visual Studio. This is why, by the way, throughout this presentation, I sometimes say Msdn license. That's what I mean by Msdn licenses. So extended subscriptions. Those subscriptions included development and test software as new subscriptions as well, may have, depending on the level of subscription. If you bought those licenses as perpetual, and even nowadays, even if it's called subscription, you have an option to buy that as a perpetual license. When subscription expires, you retain rights for your Visual Studio because it's a perpetual license. But then also all the bundled software, all the other Microsoft products that were given to you as a part of the Msdn subscription, just subscription, you may continue using them as long as they were deployed during the term when your Msdn subscription was active. The only thing you may not do, you may not upgrade, update, change that software, deploy new copies. It's extremely labor-intensive and difficult to actually assess that and check that it's all correct. But then again, if something was... So, to give you an example, say it's 2012, and somebody has Visual Studio 2012 with Msdn Enterprise, and they deploy the farm with whatever Dynamics products were at the time, Dynamic Nav, to test their own internal solution. In 2015, their subscription expired, and they decided not to renew it, but they had perpetual licenses. They not just subscription license. They had perpetual license plus SA. All that farm with that Dynamics may remain, and they may continue legitimately run it and test it and deploy, do whatever they want. They may not deploy anything new into it, and they may not upgrade the versions of the software that runs in that farm, including, very importantly, Windows operating system, unless they decide to license it somehow else, say through production licenses. Hope it makes sense. So you retain whatever you deploy during your active subscription. You may retain as long as the Visual Studio license is perpetual. Complicated, I know. Visual Studio includes other licenses in itself. One of them I have mentioned already on a couple of occasions is Azure I say Azure usually. Azure DevOps Server instance license. So each user has a license to deploy a single instance of Azure DevOps Server, which used to be called Team Foundation Services, the same product. It was renamed into Azure DevOps Server. There's Azure DevOps, Azure DevOps Server. It was renamed to Azure DevOps Server. Plus, with that Azure DevOps Server, there's a right to use SQL Server Standard instance exclusively with it. You may also buy Azure DevOps Server. Additionally, why would you buy it? Big question. If even one user has a Visual Studio license, then other people just need client access license. By the way, again, a Visual Studio subscription includes a client access license for Azure DevOps Server, which is a user license, which must be assigned to the same user who's assigned the Visual Studio license. So you may not separate them and assign it to a different user. So that's important. So don't forget this, especially when you reconcile SQL Server licenses. So these SQL servers that are usually when we see a TFS, Team Foundation Server, or a Azure DevOps server, and there's a SQL Server standard, not enterprise, running in parallel with it. My question to a client would be, are you using these for this only for this purpose? And if they prove it, I exclude it from the calculation. You don't need additional license for that SQL, and that may save you some significant money. So, I mean, not save you. Avoid the mistake of double licensing that instance. So don't forget that. Just to remind you, the other common case is SQL Server Standard comes with System Center, as well. Exclude those as well. Cross-edition rights. They only mentioned cross-edition right now. Then again, for previous editions, check those product terms. Right now, for Visual Studio 2022, the only cross-edition right is you may run standard under the enterprise license. So if somebody has a Visual Studio Enterprise license, they may deploy, for whatever reason, Visual Studio Standard. Usually, where that rule applies is, say you have a tool like, I don't know, Snow License Manager or Flixera or whatever, that tracks users that open Visual Studio, and you can see which users access the software in the last 90 days. If, say, there are two users, and there's an instance of Visual Studio Standard, and there are two users. One is licensed explicitly with Visual Studio Standard. The other one is licensed with Visual Studio Enterprise, and they have been opening that instance. That is absolutely fine, because the user who is licensed with Visual Studio Enterprise has a right to run Visual Studio Standard. That is like a more frequent exercise as compared to why would somebody deploy Standard if they have a license for Enterprise. Usually it happens the other way. So, which is actually typical mistake number one. I have a slide with typical mistakes here. Common mistakes, typical mistakes with Msdn licensing. There are more. There are like 12, but I reduced them to 6 to kind of highlight the ones that we've already talked about on a single slide. Firstly, using higher edition than license. Commonplace. Users are licensed with Standard. It's very easy to download Enterprise. They download Enterprise, they install Enterprise, they go. Where they get the key from, I have no idea, but it's a commonplace. It happens everywhere. Too many so users without Enterprise license using the Enterprise edition, don't do that. That's obviously non-compliant. You may only do down editioning. The second common mistake is upgrading or deploying instances of DevTest Msdn software without an active subscription. As I said, you may continue using them, but you have to freeze the versions of that software that you deployed during your active subscription. You may not update it, not upgrade it. The third one, not checking that third-party developers have Visual Studio licenses to bring in. So it works both ways. Check that maybe you don't need to buy them licenses, but then when you decide not to buy licenses for them because they told you that they have licenses, not checking those licenses may be a problem in an audit. Auditors will ask you for proof, and you will have to go back to those people and tell them, can you please demonstrate that you have the licenses? And if they come back and say, actually we don't, you're in trouble. Then it becomes your responsibility. Fourth common mistake is not licensing all users, it should be actually number one. Not licensing all users. As I said, 100 people access the environment, somehow only 5 are licensed. Big mistake. Fifth one is Microsoft partners using MPN licenses for direct revenue activities. If you found out, you'll be penalized. And over licensing on all the above points, all the five points. So, for example, on the point number one, only using Standard when you have enterprise licenses. Why? Maybe then you need to downgrade them when you renew next time to go to Standard. Because why would you pay too much? The second thing is just not using all the benefits of subscription licenses. If you're only using them for Visual Studio, just buy Visual Studio without subscriptions. Why would you need them unless you need some Azure benefits? On-premise, if it's only for Visual Studio, buy Visual Studio. Maybe you just need Visual Studio Code. Maybe if you're a small organization, you'll be fine with Visual Studio Community. On the third point, buying licenses when they may have brought their own. Waste of money, obviously. On the fourth point, counting too many users, which is not commonplace, but may happen. I've seen it once. Honestly, that's my frequency. Once in my life, when somebody counted too many users and they bought too many licenses because they were just afraid that auditors will find out that they have a huge IT department and made the claim that everybody in the IT department has to have a license to access like a little on-premise or non-production environment somewhere in Greece. Don't pay too much. And then, Microsoft partners not utilizing all the benefits of the MPN, which is another kind of over licensing scenario, which is rare, but it happens. Back to license management. So when you buy them, and you will probably buy them still as enterprise agreement licenses, because enterprise agreement is still here. It will gradually be removed in the next few years, and we will see the first big changes in 2022 already. Watch that space. Watch this channel. We will announce them when we know that for certain, because right now they're only just rumors. So when you buy them on an EA, it's a so-called additional product. So on additional products, there are true up doesn't work, basically, your regular true up. So what you have to report is your high watermark. So if you had a spike of use throughout the year, you have to buy true up licenses to that spike, not the number of licenses that you have by the end of the year. If that will be checked, and there are ways to check it, Microsoft can see your logins, activations, and whatnot, you'll be in trouble. So please watch the part 2 of this training, because I explain there are at least three ways, depending on how you bought a license in the initial order, later in a subscription, in the subscription as in the initial order. There are various true-up rules that apply to additional products. That is one of the common mistakes as well of managing enterprise agreement. Please don't do that. Please be careful. Piece of wisdom here from Sandeep Kumar. Movement of Visual Studio license with Msdn from enterprise to professional may not have additional license charge. However, vice versa, you will incur additional cost. Yes, I 100% agree with this statement. And my biggest advice in regards to non-production environments is, I will keep repeating this. I might even record a video about it. Dedicate everything. Reduce your costs by isolating non-production. And the best way I've seen when it was actually done, when client put the developers in 4 silos. Firstly, full dev test product stack, when you need Dynamics, SharePoint, Exchange, separate cluster or clusters. Windows Server plus SQL Server only, separate cluster or clusters. SQL Developer only, separate sandbox. And then half of their developers were non-Microsoft developers. Why would they even bother? So they created like a Linux environment for them to develop in the Java applications. And if somebody needed Java to test, they brought them to the SQL Developer only environment. So thus, by limiting access, and then who has also access to back it up, to support security, to watch after security, to manage virtual machines. When you put them in silos, you start saving significant money, especially if you are a software development house. So don't overlook dedication. Keep Azure DevOps Server away from those dedicated clusters. I remind you, it's a production. And even one production VM in the cluster makes you license all the hosts, just the host operating systems, not the VMs in them, as production. I remind you, you can't be half pregnant in licensing. You brought one VM, you deal with consequences. What I hear often is, this is my personal emotional thing. What I hear often is, but it's just one VM. So what? Yeah, but it's just one VM. Remove it. Remove it. It must be pure. Remain pure. Stay pure. And that's it. This is the last part of the training. As I said, we're going to have a test, and I talked about it a lot in the very beginning. If you have any questions about test, about licensing, about anything, what I plan to do is I plan to stay online for another 10 minutes, unless it's really, really quiet in chat, in which we can talk. So, as I explained to you about the test before, everybody whose email I have, I'll invite you. If I don't have it, send it to ask@SAMexpert.com. Or in a message on LinkedIn. Email is easier. But it's not the end. So this channel is not being closed. We will probably rerun this training by the end of 2022. Things are changing. We will continue releasing weekly videos. You know what? I can't wait for this training to stop. I can't wait. It's been so much effort. It's been so much dedication to this training. Learning ourselves as well, all the things that we talk about on this channel, in this training, sorry. So we almost completely neglected the other videos, the pre-recorded videos. I mean, the only two pre-recorded videos, three I released, that were about how we almost missed 2 million on collateral savings. That was a good one, a positive video. And the other one is when I talk about my recently received award for my time review. That's it. So I want to go back to that. I did 2 votes on this channel, on the community tab in this channel, and on LinkedIn, where I just ask people what sort of content you want from us. The overwhelming majority said pre-recorded videos, pre-scripted, pre-recorded, well-produced videos. Unfortunately, I mean, I really like live shows. I really like being here and talking to you live. Unfortunately, only about 12% said they want live shows. We're going to keep them, but the frequency of the live shows on this channel will probably be reduced. Unfortunately, I'm sorry for that. Maybe I'll do them like in a very non-binding way. They'll be like ask me anything sessions, or sudden lives where there's like a breaking news or anything, and maybe one monthly session. I'm not sure yet, but I mean, you told us do more videos than lives. We'll oblige. We're gonna do that. What do we have here? So Miss H, thank you. Oh, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you. And yeah, well, stay tuned for the test. If you want a badge, I can promise you the test will be tough. We're not going to make it easy for you, but if you've been watching this, and yeah, Leonardo, thanks for doing this. I would love to know more about activating Windows Server VMs on a virtualized dev test environment, KVM based on all. I can't tell you that right now. So I'm not really sure I understand the problem with them. As far as I remember, last time I touched that myself, it was KVM. What's the other one? Please assume all users have a valid Visual Studio subscription. Do we need to activate you need to activate them? You won't be able to run them non-activated. 180 days? They just technically won't work. Jan, thank you, Jan. Jitendra, you're awesome too. We are the first members. By the way, if you haven't heard, if you want to support what we do on this channel and just say thank you, become a member. It's only £3 a month. It's not going to break the bank. I mean, we charge like $250 per hour for our consultancy. So obviously, I mean, it's it's a big. Every time I see somebody became a member, it's such a warm feeling, almost like receiving another award. I'm not joking. Such a nice feeling. Somebody said thank you. So yeah, thank you, Nigel, for being with us. Thank you, Mahesh, for being with us. El Meza, what's your first name? I'm sorry, I don't know, but yeah, thank you for being with us. And yeah, Jitendra, thanks again. Does anyone have any licensing questions today? So which we could discuss. I mean, I appreciate this KVM question. Really caught me. I don't really even know how to answer it. I'm more of a license management person than an IT hands-on since a few years. I'll keep this slide about the test on the screen, so you understand what's going to happen in the next. Sorry, why it jump to another slide? This one. Have you registered for the test? Thank you, Pradeep. I have. By the way, I have a question. Not a question. I have almost like begging you. So, if you think something wasn't covered, for example, this KVM activation wasn't covered in this training, if you think that's vital for what you do, and you'd like for it to be included in the next year's training, which will perhaps run at the same time, we will review the format. What we found is the 2 weeks gap is too long. 2-3 hour sessions are too long. So we're thinking maybe a week gap and 1 hour long sessions, so it'll be easier on people. So please send us your suggestions. Don't worry to upset me. Say, Alex, you know what? I thought I'm going to get here this, but you didn't. Please tell it. Please tell it. So we will be happy to update the trainings and maybe do a separate session. Thank you, Pivox, for being with us, and thanks, Cheryl, again. Yeah, stay tuned. Stay tuned. So as I say on this slide, let me show this slide full screen. Next week, we'll add you to the tests mailing list. We'll ask you to confirm test participation by doing nothing. But if you don't want to take part in the test, you'll just click unsubscribe. Then we'll distribute the slides to those who stayed. And then we'll go preparing the test while you're reading the slides and rewatching the videos. Answering the question, are we going to get slides? Yes, those who are registered will get slides. And then we'll invite you to the test, and you'll have a month and 3 attempts to do it. For those who celebrate Christmas, I appreciate there'll be a few days that you'll lose because you will need to go and see your relatives and whatnot. But that's the reality. So no complaints. I'm not taking any complaints in this regard. And come on, it's a free test. So that's it. That's how it's gonna do. Be how it's gonna be. Yeah, sometimes I forget that it's not my native language, and then it reminds me. Anyway, you know what? By the way, that award, as I said in my video, that wouldn't have happened without you, because this community is strong. Would you like to set up live in person 2-3 day classes? Not for free. If you want to discuss that, please come to my LinkedIn or email ask@samexpert.com, or if you just go to the website, we have a contact form. Happy to discuss it, because we don't advertise it, but the demand for training is surprisingly quite high. Commercial trainings for organizations. So yes, we can do that. Am I right saying any non-prod environments like test consuming relying on test computer data introduced to prod will need to be licensed? Yes, yeah. If it's then taken and brought to prod, yes. That's Microsoft's interpretation. It's not written anywhere. It's not a written rule, but that's how they interpret it. And when I'm saying not written on product terms. But if you download Visual Studio licensing white paper, that's a scenario that they explicitly have there since about 2010. That is production. Yes, so I don't remember if I registered, but I would like to take a test again, either through the form on our website, SAMexpert.com, or through LinkedIn messages. So let me type my LinkedIn URL in the chat. So you'll just click it. Very simple. So you can connect to me, or you can decide to just send me a message. So my LinkedIn is configured in a way when you don't have to connect to me to send me a message. All the DMs come to me. You don't need any emails or Sales Navigator or Premium. I just accept all messages. It's because I have this creative mode and whatnot. So send me a message there, or send me an email, or send me a message to the website with just saying, Alex, please include me in the test and give me your email somehow, and I will. Stay tuned. There'll be great videos coming. So next week, 16th of November, I think it's about either 2 p.m. British time or 3 p.m. British time, afternoon. We are having what we call a conference together, us and Redress Compliance, and that's going to be a strategic one. So we're going to be talking about what the trends of Microsoft and Oracle licensing and negotiations, contract management, basic like high-level trends, not nitty-gritty licensing details. We're going to have Frederick Philipson from Redress, Morten Andersen from Redress, Daryl Ullman from SAMexpert, and yours truly, Alex Golov from SAMexpert. 4 speakers. Hope it's going to go well because we're trying a new format. I'm not going to spoil it. You'll see that when you come. You can find the details on LinkedIn. Right. On this fantastic note, and on this very, very positive note, I would like to say thank you again. Thank you and save with knowledge of licensing. Come again. This channel, this training is for this year is concluded, and next year we will restart it. You can always rewatch all the recordings anytime you want. But most importantly, come for the new videos, which we plan to release at least weekly. We'll go back to our previous cadence, releasing weekly videos, finally, up to 2 maybe per week, but that depends. So some of the training pieces will be released as separate videos as well. But we were specifically asked to produce new content instead of reusing the old one. We still reuse the old one. It populates the channel, and some people prefer to use just a short video, like 1 minute, about software assurance instead of the whole training. So, but we will certainly ramp up the effort in pre-made good videos with B-rolls. We'll see. Stay with us. Thank you and goodbye.